Okay, we can start now. Mr. Weldon has graced us with his presence. Well, good morning. You know, this is probably the best day of the year. It's the last day of this session. Y'all bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come asking you to forgive us of our sins, to lead us, to guide us, direct us in all that we do in our personal lives and what we do down here today. Let us remember that the future we talk about is the future of this state and the citizens therein. Give us wisdom. Let us not do things that don't please you. And when we do those things, please continue to forgive us. Give us your mercy and your blessings. It's going to be a long day. Help us through it. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Y'all, you know this is not the last rules meeting, okay? But it is a rules meeting, and we will set a supplemental calendar, the first one. And yes, there will be at least one more after that. But it's also, again, this is the Rules Committee, and according to Earl, I can do whatever I want to. And we got that backed up from Calvin. He said, since they're the two here that I lean on a lot. But we have one that has been on this committee for several years, who has decided that he had rather be at home. And he's had a bill in this committee since early in the session. And I would like for Mr. Ramsey to tell you about his resolution. Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the indulgence, and he's right. I did introduce a constitutional amendment and an enabling bill that was put into rules. I introduced it a little bit later than I wanted to, so we didn't move forward with it. But it's one of those issues in my going away remarks a couple days ago. I talked about those issues that are important to kind of the silent majority out there, folks out on the ball field, if you will, and this is one of them. When I'm walking around Peachtree City or at parties or with friends, the issue that comes up over and over and over again among parents is the fear of their ability to pay for their kids to go to college and their kids to be able to afford college, and the kids that are in college, the debt that they're going to walk out the door with when they leave college. So states around the country, and there's a variety of ways to get at this. We talked about providing some additional revenue streams to Hope earlier this session. But at some point, I think we really, as a legislature, and we're limited in what we can do, have to start looking at the growth in cost, the increase in cost. And that's exactly what the Tuition Certainty Act was about. I looked at what other states have done. This is H.R. 1326. What other states have done to slow the growth of tuition in their states. And just so you know, here in Georgia, and this is not an anomaly, this is in every state, tuition has outpaced over the last decade, has outpaced every single indicator, economic indicator out there, from GDP to median income to inflation. And that visits so many consequences on our constituents, from deterring low-income students from applying to college to student loan debt reaching crisis proportions. And it's just something that we've got to start to get our arms around. We're so limited. So what I came up with, what I thought was a very measured approach, and it's something I hope you guys will take forward and consider in the years ahead. And what it would have done is a constitutional amendment. All it did was authorize the General Assembly to limit the growth of tuition year over year to the rate of the growth of inflation. I provided for exceptions in there because I think there needs to be exceptions when there's economic situations come up like the Great Recession that we had, or if there's a consolidation or merger or change in mission of an institution where you may have to breach that cap. So the way it would have worked is the tuition couldn't have risen year over year more than the rate of inflation unless the House and Senate, the House Appropriations Subcommittee and the Senate Higher Education Committee would have approved a breaching of the cap on an annual basis. It would have given the legislature for the first time an ability to take a look at tuition and be a partner with the Board of Regents in looking at the factors underlying the growth in tuition and approve those when necessary to go beyond the rate of inflation. But also it would put in place, I think, a very measured mechanism to control the growth of tuition. I think it's something we need to look at. It's been done in a variety of states. Washington tied it to a rolling average of the median income in the state. Missouri has done it, tying it to inflation. A lot of states with a lot of great colleges. I know we've got some great universities here, and the world hasn't come to an end. And I just think it's one of those issues that you know, like I said, the silent majority is sitting at home worried about right now around their kitchen table, how they're going to get their kids to college and how their kids are going to pay off the debt when they get out of college. And I just kind of commend it to you guys for your consideration in the years ahead. It's not perfect, I'm sure, as any bill that's introduced is not perfect, but I hope you guys will give it some consideration as we go forward for our children and our grandchildren and generations to come. So, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the couple of minutes indulgence and appreciate you allowing me to serve on this committee and play the role that I've had, and I truly, it truly has been an honor, and I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Has anybody on the committee got questions of Mr. Ramsey? Again, is a House resolution. This is a committee meeting. I would ask if anybody wanted to move. We have a move and several others, so I'll consider that move in a second. All those in favor of Mr. Ramsey's resolution signify by raising your hand. All those opposed. It carries with one dissenting vote. Okay, we're going to go back into rules as you normally have them, and I'm going to set the first supplemental calendar for today. On modified structure, SB 304. Do I hear a move? Move. All those opposed signify by aye. No opposition. So it is on. Under modified structure, SB 345 has Have we got an amendment on 345? Mr. Fleming, would you let's go on to AM 292546. That's the amendment. Would you?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to do that. The underlying bill deals with how we in the state, our state law deals with disputes over church property. We have a formula for that in our state, and all the underlying bill does is ask our courts to please follow that. The amendment simply adds a word that was not added in the Judiciary Committee, which makes that policy as I have just described, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about it.
Any questions, Mr. Fleming? Okay, first thing, I'm going to vote the amendment. All those opposed to the amendment, raise your hand. It's on. Okay. Under modified structure, SB 356. Any opposition? It's on. Under y'all give me 1 second. Let get these amendments out. Well, while he's handing them out, let me go on down here to the bottom. SR 954. Y'all remember SR 954? On your desk, you have a amendment AM 400167. Mr. Green, would you like to tell us what that does?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gosh, everybody's calling me Mr. Speaker this morning.
I'll try not to take that job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What the amendment does is Chairman Simpson and I have stripped out the Sable portion of the of 950 Senate Resolution 954 and puts it back just like the Senate sent it to us.
Okay. You've heard the amendment. It stripped out the controversial portion of that bill yesterday and puts it back in its original. Do I hear a motion, Mr. Green? Okay. Anyone opposed to that? Okay, the amendment's there. And then at the same time, do I have a motion for SR 554? So any opposition? It's on. Directly above that is SR 892. You have an amendment on your desk, AM 390176. There was a little problem about naming portions of a highway that have already been named, and so that pulled off. It's been fixed, and those two portions are on there. Okay. I'm looking for a Smith. Mr. Smith.
Yes, there was a instance where a road had a previous name, and what they had done, it was named it after, introduced legislation to name it after a soldier who had been killed in Iraq, and because of some technicalities, but we got this fixed so that that road can now be named after that soldier who lost his life defending us.
All those in favor of the amendment signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? No opposed. Okay. That means SR 892. Do I hear a move? Any opposed? It's on. Then you have SR 863. Do I hear a move? Any opposed? It's on. Just keep going up the back of that sheet so I won't get stuck. SB 416. Any opposed to SB 416? It's on. On your desk, you have LC 440187S. It's a substitute for SB 389. Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a couple of small changes that Senator Hill agreed to. The main one was that if someone in need took a cash payout, like say they had their car broke down and that's the only help they needed, but they needed the car to get to work and they gave them $1,000, they had put in here that they could never get any other benefits, even though they are entitled to 48 months of it. So it went back and corrected it and said that if they got a cash benefit, they would take away that many months from that 48, but then they would get the rest of what they were entitled to.
On your sheet, it says Coomer. That's supposed to be Cooper. There's a P that's supposed to be in that rather than an M. Got any questions, Ms. Cooper? No questions. All right. Do I hear a move on 389? We got a move. Do I hear a second? All those opposed? Nobody opposed. It's on. Did we just get that? Okay. You might have to share on this. The next one up is SB 379. You have a LC 430397 ERS substitute for SB 379. Mr. Powell. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 1 of the substitute is Tommy Benton's HB 51, which passed this House March 2nd of last year, 152 to 1. It's over in the Senate, but it's far down on the calendar. Section 3 is David Knight's HB 365, which passed this House 160 to 0 on February the 29th of 16. Section 4 is Regina Quick's HB 923, which passed this House 159 to 0 on February the 23rd of this year, and is actually the underlying bill of SB 379. They're identical. And then starting on line 104 is Bubba Epps' HB 924, which passed this House on February 29th of 16, 159 to 13.
Okay. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the correct LC number because I got two on my desk. You were talking about 97 just then?
Right, 397.
Well, let me try to ask my question this way. Do you have the other one in front of you, 94? There's a section on LC 430394 on page 3, right at the top of the page, beginning with line about 60, I think. There's a portion. Is that in the 97, that portion?
No.
That's out, okay.
Section 3 of the other LC came out. That's the difference between the two LCs.
So that portion I'm asking about is not in the one that we're considering?
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
No more questions. All right, then I'll ask for a motion for 316. I got a motion second. All those opposed, it's on. Next up, SB 378. That is, Mr. Miller was here, but we don't have people on the walls for these. Ms. Ballinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just a little bit confused, and unfortunately, I'm very sorry that Senator Miller isn't here. It's my understanding this is a piece of local legislation. Does anybody know?
Yes, ma'am.
It was my understanding, so I guess I'm asking why it's here.
Why, what?
Why is it a general bill and not a local bill if it's a piece of local legislation? I didn't know if anybody could speak to that. I was just wondering, because he said it specifically spoke to DeKalb County.
I'm sorry, Madam Minority Leader.
Not to speak for Senator Miller, this is local legislation. There was an identical bill introduced in the House. It did not get the requisite signatures. Senator Miller opted to make it general legislation in the Senate, but this is entirely a local issue, and there's a great deal of concern about us using a general bill to change the structure of a county when the local body has not decided to do so. And in fact, this body, both the House and the Senate, have approved a county commission review process. This commission review process will include the information there's a specific language that was included in the commission review process that will allow the commission to consider the terms and conditions that Senator Miller is asking for. And it will take effect this year, which will give us adequate time to bring the full commission report back. And so I very strongly object to this being a general bill because it is a local issue, and there is a process that has been agreed to by most of the local delegation to approach it in this way. We've included his requests. We've included requests from all parties and all sides. And this, I think, is a moot issue until we have had that commission report, because this would basically supersede and anticipate everything the county commission the Charter Review Commission will do. And I think it's inappropriate at this time.
So can you just speak a little bit about the process, trying not to wade too much into DeKalb County?
Nobody wants to. This is actually a protective bill where my objection is to protect the rest of the state from DeKalb County. Basically,
I like that.
Right now in DeKalb County, we are the only CEO form of government, and there's a great deal of concern about whether that should be sustained. And I think both Democrats and Republicans in DeKalb County have raised concerns about this. But the challenge is, the last time we precipitously changed parts of our charter to address this issue, we created a worse problem. So in 2008, this body approved local legislation to change it without there being a review commission, and the result was that we made it worse. So what the county commission has asked for, some of whom want to change the form of government, some of whom do not, but they have all agreed that we need a review commission to understand what we need to do to put into line the form of government that is best for DeKalb County. That review commission passed both the House and the Senate as local legislation, and it will include specifically a conversation about whether we should change the form of government. But there are other issues, because last year this body, the House and the Senate, also approved legislation to change our ethics commission. So we're doing a process. This would anticipate all of that and render it all moot by putting on the ballot in November a decision before the commission has a chance to actually do its work. And so while I respect what Senator Miller is attempting to do, it's putting the cart well in front of the horse. The horse is already ready to go, and so there's that problem with the content. The form concern I have, though, is that this is a county issue that should go through local legislation. And I know there have been conversations about the fact that we've changed the rule for cityhood, but cityhood was different, and there was notice to everyone that we were doing it differently. This would be the first time this body has unilaterally taken away the local control over a county issue. And to do so, I think, is inappropriate. And just to bring this body's attention back, a few weeks ago, we had an issue with the school board. And it was brought to my attention that the school board change that was roundly defeated should have been done as local legislation. And I thought that was a valid and important argument. And we requested that members of our caucus change their vote to allow a local issue to be decided based on the local intent. And indeed, when that vote was reconsidered, it passed easily. I simply ask for the same courtesy for DeKalb County, because this is a major structural issue, and to change the structure of our county before our county has a chance to weigh in, before the citizens have a chance to weigh in, I think is very dangerous.
So what was the process? So in other words, because I know, my delegation, we have rules and that sort of thing.
So in the House, there was a bill from actually a Democratic representative to accomplish the same. It was voted, they didn't secure enough signatures. There was a second one, which was the commission, the Charter Review Commission, that actually secured all the signatures it needed. On the Senate side, the senator could not get a sufficient number of signatures on the Senate side, and so he introduced it as general legislation rather than as local legislation to circumvent their process. But by doing so, they also circumvented the process for the DeKalb delegation on the House side, because the House and Senate have different delegation rules. And so this would circumvent the House delegation rules by coming forward as general legislation rather than as local legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to clarify for Representative Ballinger that these are the same arguments that we heard 12 years ago with cityhood. And in particular, I don't believe you were minority leader, but by the minority leader at the time that made the exact same arguments when we passed Sandy Springs. Now, we have a history of doing that, but it was the exact same arguments 12 years ago. And it was the same arguments that we heard when we voted, and I believe almost all, if not all, the Democrats voted against allowing the governor to have the authority to remove school board members when Clayton County lost its accreditation and when DeKalb County was at risk of losing it. And so I would just ask that you give that consideration, that Representative Tom Taylor, it's not just a Fran Miller bill, Representative Tom Taylor also feels this is very important. And DeKalb County, I do understand that there will be an amendment to delay it another 2 years so that we would have 4 years, so that if there are changes, we could make that, but at least it would set a deadline for change. At least one and maybe more of the commissioners have gone to jail. We've had some real problems in DeKalb County, but in deference also to Tom Taylor, who is not on rules, I would ask that you give consideration.
Mr. Powell, A.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of my questions have been answered by Ms. Ballinger in her discourse. I got concerns about that we're deviating from the norm of handling local legislation as general legislation. You know, it may not always be, the majority may not always be in the current mode right now, and that could create problems for a lot of the rest of us in other counties. While I certainly do agree that given the dysfunctionality of recent years in DeKalb County, that maybe general legislation should be reserved for basically abolishing DeKalb County and sending a pro rata portion to all other counties that have a geographic boundary. But I think maybe that should be the purpose of general legislation.
Mr. Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, I had someone ask me the same questions that Representative Ballinger had brought up, and I was going to respond to her question, but as usual, the minority leader has exhibited superior knowledge than I had, and did a good job of explaining the answer to Representative Ballinger's question of why this is outside the normal process. Thank you.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my question is a parliamentary inquiry, I think, or clarification on the part of our minority leader. I followed the trail, but I got lost when we got to the Senate side, and it appears to me that the legislation introduced on the House side failed on the Senate side, so that's my request for clarification. And I'm thinking maybe the Senate did an equal local legislation and has not passed the House. I just got lost in the last bouncing ball part of this.
So there are two pieces of legislation. There is a Charter Review Commission, which has passed both the House and the Senate. And there has been strong agreement. In fact, Senator Miller and Representative Taylor were both involved in the Review Commission piece. And indeed, an amendment was made to include specifically the look at the form of government. And there are appointees who will be on that commission who are both pro and anti-CEO form of government. Then there is the there's the version of 379 that was introduced as local legislation by Representative Scott Holcomb. That did not pass the local delegation on the House side. It did not come out of the House. The Senate version also did not make it through the local delegation, and so it was introduced again as a general bill. And as a general bill, that's what brings it before the body. I would add only that, with all due respect to the Speaker Pro Tem, I voted in favor of I've been very consistent in my advocacy for us following the rules as they are written. When we were advised that the rules would be changed by Chairman Amy Carter with regard to cityhood, since that time there has been no objection to the form of the process because there was notification and there was a process set in place by Representative Carter when she was Chair of Government Affairs. And that is when we as a body decided to treat cityhood bills in a certain process. They were delayed for a single year. They had to have a 2-year process. There was a very clear set of guidelines set. This does not comport with how we as a body, since I have been leader, have treated bills like this. And for me, the substance is important, but it's also the rule. If we are going to fundamentally change our approach to local legislation, then the ability of this body to adequately consider and process local legislation, I think, is destroyed. And I think, I cannot speak for my predecessors, but since my tenure began in 2011, I've been incredibly consistent about my approach to local legislation. When there have been concerns, I've worked very diligently with the majority party to make certain that we maintain the respect that we show when it comes to local legislation. And if you look at my votes, I've never varied from that. And indeed, I have most recently demonstrated that to respect local legislation, even though I fundamentally disagreed with the bill on my own side of the aisle, I worked the process first and then voted my politics second. And so I would strongly urge this body not to destroy what is, by and large, a very workable system where local legislation is considered locally and where we respect how this body operates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hughley.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. With respect to this bill, I think we need to consider that today it's DeKalb, but in the future it could be any one of the communities that we represent, and for us to pursue a course where we're going to allow the minority to rule in something that the majority of the elected representatives in that area are not in favor of is very dangerous. And one day it's going to come home to each and every one of us. Clearly, this is not something that it should be a general bill. It's local politics, and we need to allow the local people to work it out under the rules we have, and not do this in this manner. And Mr. Powell did it correctly, it's not always going to be the way that it is, so we need to make sure that we don't go down this road.
I've got a question from Ms. Jones. Did you say that there was an amendment?
Yes, sir, I believe there will be an amendment.
Will be. So we don't have an amendment right now.
That's correct. I'd suggest we wait on this bill.
Ms. Cooper.
Chairman, if I may, at the Speaker Pro Tem, if perhaps, since there's an amendment, that amendment could be changed to include, since there's so much controversy about it, some issue of where if the commission works and meets and all and takes action, that this bill would become moot.
That might be helpful. We ought to consider.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? That's it. I'm at attention. My boss is here. He- I must have already done a real good job then. Since there is an amendment for that, I'm going to wait before we make a decision as to whether that goes on the floor. What I've already done is going to be the first supplemental. We'll look at the rest of them in the second. Now, Richard's not going to let me adjourn us. We're adjourned.